is a 3D program, so in order to use it, we have to navigate through the scene in 3D. We can do that by using a number of different menu commands. Now you can find these under Camera. There's three. There's Orbit, Pan, and Zoom, and notice they have three hotkeys, O, H, and Z. And we can also find them here on the basic menu bar. This is Orbit, Pan, the little hand, and Zoom. So if I want, I can select one of these, Orbit, hit the O key, or I can middle click to activate this, and then I can just orbit around my scene. So I can go look at the back, I can look at the front, I can look at the top. So if you drag up and down, it drags up and down. If you drag left and right, it kind of orbits left and right. Now if you're in another tool, you can always middle click and always get to the orbit tool, which is kind of nice. So if you have a 3-button mouse, it can be very handy for SketchUp. Now if you want to pan, you can hit the H key, which stands for hand or pan, and you can pan around. So you can pan left or right. And then if we want, we can zoom, and that means basically just moving out or into the scene. And again, when you have one of these active, you can always middle click and orbit, which can be very, very handy. Now, if you want to navigate further, you can also roll the middle mouse button. So if you want to, you can zoom by either left clicking and dragging or rolling the middle mouse button. So the middle mouse button can actually be a pretty good navigation tool. So I can middle click and drag to orbit or roll that middle mouse button to zoom. Now there's some additional camera tools that we can take a look at. One is called field of view. Now this is really the camera angle. In other words, whether it's a fisheye or a zoom lens. So let's go ahead and hit field of view. And you can see we get another magnifying glass, but this time it's changing the field of view. So we can either go to more of an orthographic or a long lens on our camera, or we can go in and go to a much wider view. So this can be very handy, particularly if you want to see inside tight spaces, you might want a wider lens. Now there's one more set of tools, and that's zoom window and zoom to extent. So zoom window basically allows you to draw a window or basically an area, and then the system will automatically zoom to that area. So if I go back out and I do camera zoom window and I zoom in, say, on these chairs, I can see them much more clearly. And then finally we have one called zoom extents, which basically just fits everything in the scene in the window. So those are some of the basics about how to navigate in SketchUp. So go ahead and take a SketchUp scene and go ahead and practice orbiting, panning, and zooming so you get used to that sort of workflow. Okay, so let's understand where everything is at before we start using the software. Now SketchUp is a highly graphic program, and as you can see it has a very large viewport here which allows us to see things in 3D, and we'll talk a little bit about navigation later. Now along the top we have a standard menu bar which gives us our file, edit, view, which allows us to change the way we view our scenes, camera, which again changes our viewports, and then tools that allow us to draw, other tools that allow us to change things that have been drawn, and then additional windows that can bring up things like materials and that sort of thing to actually see what's in the scene. We also have a very nice help system here. Now, when you first start SketchUp, you'll probably see a toolbar just like this, and this is really just graphic icons that represent a lot of the tools that you can find in the menus. Now along the bottom, we have a number of little buttons here. This first one is for geolocation. So if your model is actually located to a specific place on Earth, you can find that geolocation. This one here shows you who made the model. So if you import a model from somewhere else, you'll know who made it. This just allows you to sign into Google, which is handy if you're using their 3D warehouse. And then this one actually is very important. This is your help button, and it brings up a window called the instructor. And this is kind of a nice graphic representation of how to use each individual tool in the toolbar. So right now I have the select tool activated, but if I were to select, say, the pencil tool or the line tool or the push-pull tool, each one of those will have a graphic representation of how it works, and this can be very easy to use. Now finally, in the bottom corner is a little input box. Now if we're actually drawing something, we can actually type specific dimensions into this box to give it very precise measurements. So those are some of the basics of the SketchUp interface. SketchUp. First, we're going to learn how to select and move objects. So we have a very simple scene here with a couple of different objects. Now if we want to select them, we can use the select tool here. We find it on our toolbar, or if you go into tools, you'll see it's select, and the hotkey for that is space. So whenever you hit the space bar, it always goes back to the select tool. Now once I have the select tool open, I can just left click on any object to select it. Now notice how it highlights in blue. If I want to select multiple objects, all I have to do is shift and select. If I keep the shift key held down, I can toggle objects on or off. Now I can also left click and drag and rubber band select multiple objects. Now clicking off of the objects deselects them. Now if I want to move objects, I can use the move tool. Again, it's under tools, move. The hotkey is M. You can also find it here in the toolbar. So once you select the move tool, you can actually select, and once you selected it, you can start moving the object. So if I click on an object, I can move it. Now notice how it will start to snap to individual axes. In SketchUp, we have 3 axes. We have red, green, and blue, or X, Y, and Z. And we can move our objects wherever we want, but if we want to actually precisely move them, we can move them along an axis. Now if you select an object and move it, notice how it's kind of trying to snap to these axes, and it'll tell you it's on the red axis, oh, it's on the blue axis, it's on the green axis. And if you snap to the proper axis that you want, all you have to do is hold down the shift key, and notice how that gets bold, and now it will only move along that axis. So if I want to move it along green, I hold down the shift key, find green, hold down the shift key, and then let go. If I want to move this along the blue axis, I find the blue axis, hold down the shift key, and I can move it up or down. And again, the same here. If I move this object and I find the red axis again, shift key will enable it to move only along that axis. So one of the things you can do is you can also move multiple objects. So if you hit the space bar and select multiple objects, you can move them all at once. And again, they will snap to the axes that you want. Now typically the workflow for SketchUp is to basically move it one axis at a time. If you want to move something back, move it along the X-axis and then move it along the Y. Another easy way to move them is to use orthographic views. So if you use a top view with parallel projection, it's a lot easier to move things horizontally along the ground. So those are some of the basics of the move tool. Go ahead and practice, get used to it, and then we'll move on.